I spent 4 years and $280,000 paying off my mother's house, renovating every room in it, and building a fully accessible suite on the back of the property so she would never have to climb stairs again after her treatment ended. I did not mention the trust to my older brother Marcus. I did not explain the LLC structure I had set up with my attorney 18 months before the renovation was finished. I did not tell him about the clause I had written in specifically to prevent what he eventually tried to do. 3 weeks before my mother was scheduled to move back in after her final round of treatment, I got a call from a real estate agent I had never spoken to in my life asking me when I planned to vacate the property because her clients were eager to proceed with closing. That was when I found out. My brother Marcus had listed my mother's house with a private real estate brokerage. He had presented himself as the co-owner. He had produced a document with what was supposed to be my signature on it authorizing the sale. He had accepted an offer. He had told the buyers the property would be available in 30 days. What Marcus did not know was that I had spent 2 years building a legal structure around that property so precise and so complete that the sale he thought he had arranged was void before the ink on his fake agreement was even dry. And I let him believe it was real for 11 more days before I made a single call. Pause. If you have ever given everything you had to protect someone you love and watched a family member treat your sacrifice like a windfall they were owed, type "done everything right" in the comments right now. I read every single one and I want you to know you are not alone in this. My name is Caleb Thornton and I am 38 years old. For the past 11 years I have worked as a contract administrator and title examiner for a regional real estate law firm. My job is to read documents. My job is to find the gap between what a document says and what the person holding it believes it says. My job is to understand exactly where a legal structure is weak and to close that gap before someone else finds it. I have sat across the table from people who believed they owned something they did not own. I have reviewed agreements that looked binding until you read the 3rd paragraph. I have watched deals collapse in the final hour because a title had a cloud on it that no one caught until I did. I have spent 11 years learning how property gets taken from people who built it, and I have spent that same 11 years learning exactly what it takes to make sure that does not happen. When I decided to pay off my mother's house and rebuild it for the life she deserved after everything she had been through, I did not just build a home, I built a fortress around it. I built it quietly, I built it completely, and I built it long before I had any reason to believe I would ever need it. My mother's name is Gloria Thornton and she's 61 years old. She raised 2 boys on her own after my father left when I was 9 and Marcus was 14. She worked as a school cafeteria supervisor for 23 years. She kept the same house the whole time. A 3-bedroom rancher in a quiet part of town that she had bought with my father before everything fell apart and that she had spent the next 2 decades paying down on a cafeteria supervisor's salary. She never complained about the house. She never complained about much of anything. But I watched her limp down the hallway after her hip started giving her trouble, and I watched her hold the stair rail with both hands, and I watched her smile at me like everything was fine when it clearly was not fine at all. And then 4 years ago she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and everything that had been quietly hard became something else entirely. I was already planning before the diagnosis. I had been saving for 2 years with the specific intention of paying off whatever remained on her mortgage and doing a full renovation of the property. The diagnosis accelerated everything. I sat with my attorney the week after my mother's first oncology appointment and we began structuring the trust. I did not tell Marcus. I told myself it was because I wanted to surprise my mother. That was partly true. But if I am honest, and I am always honest in these reflections, I also did not tell Marcus because I had watched him long enough to understand something about him that I had never said out loud to anyone. Marcus is a person who sees opportunity the way other people see weather. He does not plan to be opportunistic. It is simply how his mind works. He looks at any situation and immediately calculates what is available and to whom and whether he is positioned to access it. I had watched him do this my whole life with small things. A family dinner where the leftovers disappeared before anyone else thought to ask. A tool borrowed from a neighbor. Or in return 2 years later when the neighbor mentioned it. Small things, the kind of things you file away and tell yourself do not mean anything about a person's character. By the time I was planning my mother's house, I had been filing those things away for 30 years and the file was full. I did not build the legal protection because I expected Marcus to betray me. I built it because I am a professional who understands that the cost of not building it is always higher than the cost of building it. That is what I do, that is how I think, and as it turned out, it was the most important thing I ever did. The trust I established was irrevocable. That is not a detail, that is the entire story. An irrevocable trust means that once the property is placed inside it, no one, not me, not my mother, not anyone in our family, can simply decide to transfer it or sell it or borrow against it without following a legal process that requires multiple parties and in most cases a court order. The trust named my mother as the sole beneficiary for the duration of her life, meaning she had the right to live in the property, to enjoy it, and to make decisions about its use. but the property itself was held by the trust, not by her personally and not by me personally. I was named as the trustee. My attorney was named as the successor trustee, not any family member. I also set up a single-member LLC that held the management rights to the property. That LLC had one manager. Me. The operating agreement for that LLC contained a clause I had drafted myself based on situations I had seen professionally. It stated that any attempt to sell, lease, encumber, or transfer any property managed by the LLC, without the written notarized consent of the sole manager, would be considered an unauthorized action, and would expose the acting party to personal liability for all costs, damages, and legal fees arising from that action. I had my attorney review it. She added 2 things and said the rest was already tighter than most documents she drafted herself. Then I paid off my mother's mortgage, $212,000 paid directly to the lender. The deed was reissued in the name of the trust. I began the renovation the following spring. I want you to understand what this renovation was. This was not a coat of paint and new appliances. I gutted the back quarter of the property and built a fully accessible suite from the ground up. Wide doorways throughout the suite, 36 inches minimum, so my mother would have room to move comfortably with a walker if she ever needed one. A zero-threshold shower with a built-in bench and handheld fixtures. Radiant floor heating in the bathroom and the bedroom because my mother gets cold easily and has ever since the chemotherapy. A small kitchen area within the suite so she would never have to walk to the main kitchen in the middle of the night if she needed something. A sliding glass door that opened onto a private patio so she could sit outside in the morning without having to navigate the whole house. I also renovated the main house completely. New roof, new windows. The kitchen she had always wanted, with the deep farmhouse sink she had mentioned once while watching a renovation show and assumed no one was listening. I was listening. I put in the sink. I put in new electrical throughout because the old panel was 40 years old and I was not going to let the first thing my mother did in her new home be call an electrician at 2 in the morning. I had the HVAC replaced. I had the driveway repaved and widened so she could park closer to the front door. I had the front path redone in a non-slip surface because ice in winter is its own kind of hazard for someone whose balance is not what it used to be. I did every single thing I could think of, and then I built the invisible part around all of it. I told my mother what I had done about 3 months before the renovation finished. She was in the middle of her final treatment cycle. We were sitting in a hospital waiting room and she had her eyes closed because the lights were too bright, and I just told her quietly that she did not have to worry about the house anymore. She opened her eyes and looked at me and I told her the mortgage was gone and that the house was going to be ready for her when she was ready for it. She did not cry. My mother almost never cries. She took my hand and she held it for about 30 seconds and then she said, "I need you to tell me you did not go into debt for this." I told her I had not. She nodded and closed her eyes again. That was it. That was the whole conversation. I did not tell her about the trust. I did not tell her about the legal structure. I told her the house was taken care of and that she could rest. She rested. Pause. I made one mistake in those months. I told Marcus about the renovation during a phone call in the spring, not the legal structure, not the mortgage payoff amount, not the trust. I just told him that I had been doing some work on Mom's house and that it was going to be ready for her when her treatment was done. He asked a few questions. How much work? What kind of renovations? Was there a suite in the back like she had always wanted? I answered honestly because I had no reason not to. I told him there was a suite and that the whole house had been updated. He said that was great and that he was glad I was taking care of her. He said he had been meaning to get more involved, but things had been difficult. Marcus had been going through financial problems for about 2 years at that point. A failed business venture involving a food truck that had seemed like a good idea and then had not been. Some credit card debt that he mentioned once and then acted like he had never mentioned. A lease on a vehicle he could not comfortably afford. I knew about the financial pressure, but I did not connect it to anything at the time. I filed it in the same folder I had been keeping for 30 years and I got back to work. 3 weeks before my mother's move-in date, I got the call from the real estate agent. Her name was Sandra and she was very professional and clearly very confused. She said she had been working with a client named Marcus Thornton on the sale of a property at my mother's address and that she wanted to confirm the timeline for vacancy. She said her clients were a young couple who were very excited about the property and that they understood the current occupant was in a medical situation and they were willing to be flexible on timing, but they needed to know when the property would be available. She said Marcus had represented himself as a co-owner with authorization to proceed with the sale. She said she had a co-ownership agreement in her file with 2 signatures on it. I asked her to describe the second signature. She said it was listed as Caleb Thornton. I told her my name was Caleb Thornton. There was a pause on her end. I told her she should stop all activity on that transaction immediately and that I would be in contact with her through my attorney within 24 hours. She was quiet for a moment and then she said she would do that and that she was very sorry for any confusion. I thanked her and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for about 4 minutes. Not because I was deciding what to do. I already knew what to do. I sat there because I was absorbing what it felt like to have been right about something you had hoped you were wrong about. I had hoped the folder was wrong. I had hoped the 30 years of small moments added up to nothing. They did not add up to nothing. They added up to this. Marcus had found out what I built. He had decided my mother's house was an asset he could access. He had created a false co-ownership agreement. He had forged my signature. He had engaged a real estate agent and gotten an offer accepted on a property he had no legal right to sell. He had done all of this while my mother was in treatment, while she was finishing the last rounds of the protocol that had taken the past 2 years of her life. While she was planning what she was going to plant in the garden of the house, she did not know I had already made untouchable. Pause, let me tell you exactly what I had already built before he made a single move. The trust document was filed with the county recorder's office. It was a matter of public record. Anyone who did a title search on that property would have found it within 60 seconds. The deed was reissued in the name of the trust and also recorded. The management agreement between the trust and the LLC was notarized and filed. The LLC operating agreement naming me as sole manager was filed with the state. My attorney had also prepared. As a standard precaution, she recommended for all her clients in situations involving family-held property, a notarized statement of the complete ownership and management chain for the property, dated and signed and kept on file at her office. Every single layer of the structure had been in place for over a year before Marcus made any move, which means what he tried to do was never legally possible. Not on the day he filed the fake agreement. Not on the day he engaged Sandra. Not on the day the buyers made their offer. The sale was void at every stage because there was nothing for Marcus to sell. He did not own any interest in the property. He had no management rights. He had no authority to sign anything. The co-ownership agreement he had created did not grant him rights that did not exist and could not be granted by a document he had fabricated himself. The whole structure he had tried to build was resting on nothing. Slow, and he did not know it yet. I called my attorney that night. I described the situation in full. She was not surprised. She said this was exactly the kind of situation the documents had been written to handle. She said she would prepare an updated cease and desist that specifically named Mark, us, the real estate brokerage, and the buyer's agent, and that she would have it ready with supporting documentation within 2 business days. She also noted something I had not considered. The buyers had been told the property was available for purchase. If they had taken any financial steps in reliance on that representation, such as pausing other property searches, paying for an inspection, or engaging a lender, Marcus could be personally liable for those costs as well. The forged agreement he had created made him the representing party. Every damage that flowed from his false representation was his personal financial exposure. My attorney said she would make sure the cease and desist documented all of that clearly. She also said that the forged signature on the co-ownership agreement was a serious matter that went beyond civil liability. She said I should think about what I wanted to do with that. I told her I would think about it. She said she would have everything ready in 2 days and that I could decide how I wanted to proceed once I saw the full picture on paper. I thanked her and I hung up, and I did not call Marcus. I let 11 days pass. During those 11 days, I continued coordinating the final details of my mother's move-in. I ordered furniture for the suite that she had picked from a catalog during one of her treatment weeks when she needed something to look forward to. I had the garden area near the back patio prepared so she could start planting in the spring. I set up the digital thermostat for the radiant floors, and I tested the zero-threshold shower twice to make sure the drainage was right. I did all of this while knowing what Marcus had done and not saying a word to him about it. He called me once during those 11 days to ask how my mother's final appointments were going. I told him they were going well. He said he was glad and that he was going to try to come see her soon. I said that would be nice. We talked for 4 minutes and hung up. Pause. I drove to the property on a Tuesday. I arrived at 11 in the morning. Marcus's car was in the driveway. He had a key to the property because my mother had given him 1 year ago and I had never asked for it back. I had not needed to ask for it back. The locks were keypad locks. His old key opened nothing. He had gotten in through a window in the back that had been left unlatched by the contractor. I found this out later. What I saw when I arrived was Marcus standing in the kitchen talking on the phone. He saw me through the window. He ended the call. He came to the front door and opened it before I could reach for the keypad. He said he was just checking on the place. He said he had let himself in because he wanted to see how the renovation had turned out. He said it looked great and that I had done a really good job. He said the suite in the back was especially nice. He said all of this in the tone of a person who is saying one thing and meaning something entirely different and believes the other person cannot tell the difference. I told him I was glad he liked it. I told him to come sit down at the kitchen table because there were some things I needed to go over with him regarding the property. He sat down. He let me get through about 30 seconds of silence before he decided to take control of the conversation. He said he had been thinking about the property. He said he understood I had put a lot into it and that what I had done for our mother was incredible. He really meant that it was incredible. He said but that he had been thinking about the practical reality of the situation, which was that our mother was 61 years old and in recovery, and that there were going to be years when she might not be able to live there independently, and that the family needed to be thinking ahead about those scenarios. He said he had done some research on the property values in the area and that the numbers were significant. He used the phrase significant twice. He said he had made some preliminary inquiries about what the market might look like for the property given the renovation and the additions. He said preliminary inquiries, which was an interesting way to describe having gotten an offer accepted through a real estate brokerage. He said he thought it made sense for us to have a formal conversation as a family about the best use of the asset. He used the word asset. He was talking about our mother's home. He called it an asset. I let him finish. I asked him one question. I asked him whether the preliminary inquiries he had mentioned had reached the stage of a signed purchase agreement with a specific buyer. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said that there had been some exploratory conversations but nothing binding. I wrote something down on the notepad I had brought. Then I opened my bag and I placed 4 documents on the table. Pause. The first document was the trust agreement. I placed it open to the page that described the true. In structure, the name trustee, and the clause prohibiting any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of the property without trustee authorization through a notarized process. I pointed to the clause. I did not explain it. I gave him time to read it. He read it. He looked up at me. I placed the second document on top of the first. This was the recorded deed showing the property held in the name of the trust with no co-ownership provisions and no other parties listed in any capacity. I pointed to the recording stamp in the upper right corner. That stamp meant this document had been filed with the county recorder's office and was a matter of public record. Any title search, any due diligence by any real estate agent or buyer's attorney would have found this document. Any real transaction on this property would have required a title search, which meant the sale Marcus had arranged could not have closed. It would have collapsed the moment the buyer's lender ordered a title report. Marcus would have known this if he had consulted a real estate attorney before proceeding. He had not consulted one. He looked at the second document for a long time. He did not pick it up. The third document was the management exclusion agreement, notarized, dated, filed. It stated in plain language that no family member, including specifically any sibling of the trustee, had any authority to manage, lease, sell, or represent the property in any commercial or legal capacity without written notarized consent from the sole trustee, which was me. I watched Marcus read his description in that document. I watched him understand that I had anticipated him specifically, not because I had known what he would do. Because I had known what the gaps in my protection could allow if I did not close them. The fourth document was the cease and desist from my attorney. It named Marcus by full name. It named the brokerage. It described in specific detail every action Marcus had taken, including the creation of a co-ownership agreement bearing a forged signature, the engagement of a real estate brokerage under false pretenses, the acceptance of an offer on property he had no authority to sell, and the representation to buyers of a timeline and availability that was entirely fabricated. It stated that all of these actions had created personal financial exposure for Marcus, including potential liability to the buyers for costs incurred in reliance on his false representations. It stated that failure to comply with the required corrective actions within 72 hours would result in the filing of a civil complaint, and that the matter of the forged signature had been referred to my attorney's office for assessment of appropriate next steps. I did not say that last part out loud. I let him read it, pause slow. Marcus sat there for a very long time after he finished reading the fourth document. I did not fill the silence. I have spent 11 years in rooms where silence does the work that words cannot, and I have learned to let it. He looked at the documents. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He did not look at me for a while, and when he finally did, his face had changed. The confidence was gone. What was there instead was something that took me a moment to identify because I had not seen it on him before. It was the face of a person who had built a plan on a foundation that did not exist and who had just understood that fact completely. He said he had not known about the trust. I told him the trust had been filed with the county recorder's office for over a year and that a title search would have surfaced it immediately. He said he had not done a title search. I said I knew. He said he had thought that since I had paid for it, the property was mine to deal with as I saw fit, and that he had thought he was helping the family find a solution. I did not respond to that. I let it sit there between us where it belonged. Then he made the appeal I had been expecting. He said we were brothers. He said our mother needed both of us. He said whatever had gone wrong here, we were still family, and family had to find a way through things together. He said he had been going through a very hard time financially, and that he had not been thinking clearly, and that he had made some mistakes, and that he was sorry. Firm, I looked at him and I said this. The trust does not recognize financial pressure as a claim on this property, and I will not either. This house belongs to our mother. Every document on this table confirms that, and every document on this table will remain exactly where it is until she no longer needs a home. Pause, almost a whisper. Marcus left 20 minutes later. He did not slam the door. He did not say anything dramatic. He walked to his car and he sat in it for a while and then he drove away. I sat at the kitchen table and I looked at the farmhouse sink. I looked at the wide hallway. I looked at the afternoon light coming through the new windows. I called my attorney and I told her Marcus had been served and that I wanted to discuss the forged signature matter in more detail when she had time. She said she would reach out to schedule a call. I told her thank you. I hung up. I went into the suite and I looked at the zero-threshold shower. I looked at the radiant floor thermostat. I looked at the sliding glass door and the patio beyond it where my mother was going to drink her coffee in the mornings. I went outside and I stood on the patio for a while. The yard was quiet. There was nothing there that did not belong. Emotional. Marcus complied with every requirement in the cease and desist within 60 hours. He contacted the brokerage and withdrew from the transaction. He sent written confirmation to my attorney. The buyers were disappointed but had not yet paid for an inspection, so their direct financial exposure was limited. The brokerage was cooperative once my attorney's office made contact and provided the trust documentation. Sandra, the agent, had done nothing wrong. She had taken Marcus at his word and she had relied on documents that appeared legitimate on the surface. She was professional and apologetic, and I have no issue with how she handled the situation. The matter of the forged signature I have chosen for now not to pursue criminally. That is a decision I made after long thought and that I am at peace with. It is not because what Marcus did was acceptable. It was not acceptable. It is because my mother does not need a family legal proceeding happening in the background of her recovery. She needs peace. She needs her patio. She needs the farmhouse sink and the radiant floors and the garden she's going to plant in the spring. What Marcus did will not be forgotten, and the relationship has changed in ways that are permanent and that both of us understand. But pursuing criminal charges is not the change I am choosing right now. I may revisit that. My attorney has preserved all of the documentation. Nothing has been destroyed or waived. I have simply chosen what serves my mother best at this moment in time, and that choice is mine to make. My mother moved into the house 6 days after the cease and desist was complied with. She walked through the front door and stood in the hallway for about 30 seconds. She looked at the walls. She looked at the floors. She walked into the kitchen and she put her hand on the farmhouse sink and she stood there with her hand on it for a while without saying anything. Then she walked to the back of the house and into the suite and she looked at the bathroom and she looked at the sliding glass door and the patio. She slid the door open and she stepped out onto the patio and she stood there in the afternoon light and I watched her from inside. She did not know about what Marcus had tried to do. I had not told her and I did not tell her that day. I told her later in pieces when she was strong enough that the information would not cost her anything she needed for herself. Her reaction was quiet. She is a quiet person. She asked me if the house was safe now. I told her it was the safest it could legally be made. She said that was enough for her and she went back to looking at the garden. That is my mother. That is 61 years of making the best of what is in front of you and moving forward. Marcus came to the house the following month. My mother had invited him. She said whatever had happened between us was between us and that she did not intend to live her life with one son missing from her table. I respect that. I respected it then. He sat at the kitchen table and he drank coffee and he complimented the renovation in a way that was both sincere and uncomfortable, and I let it be both of those things. He and I did not discuss what had happened. We did not need to. We both knew exactly where everything stood, and we both knew that the documents were filed and that nothing had changed legally and that nothing was going to change legally. The conversation we needed to have had already happened at that table with 4 documents between us. Everything since then has been the quieter and slower work of understanding what we are to each other now that we both know what he's capable of and what I had already prepared for. That work is ongoing. It is not finished. It may never be fully finished, but the house is safe. My mother is home, the trust is intact, and none of that was ever up for debate. I want to speak directly to you now because I think you are watching this for a reason. I think you are either in the middle of building something for someone you love or you have already built it, and something has happened that made you feel like you should have protected it better, or you are the person who is watching this at 2 in the morning because you already know what your Marcus knows and you are trying to figure out what to do. I have thought about what I want to say to all 3 of those people, and I think it is the same thing. The protection is not the opposite of the love. The protection is what the love looks like when it has to last longer than the moment it is given. When I built my mother's house, I was thinking about her hip and her coffee and her farmhouse sink. When I built the trust around it, I was thinking about everything that could happen in the next 30 years that I could not predict or prevent, but that I could make survivable. I was thinking about the scenario where something happened to me. I was thinking about the scenario where someone in the family saw the asset, as Marcus eventually called it, and decided they had a right to it that they had not earned and did not have. I was thinking about all of the ways that generosity gets mistaken for permission. When you build something for someone you love and you do not build the legal protection around it, you are not leaving it open because you trust people. You are leaving it open because you have not yet accepted that trust is not the same thing as safety. Trust is what you feel. Safety is what you build. Both matter. They are just not the same thing. My profession gave me tools that most people do not have. I understand that. I understand that most people who build something for their family are not title examiners who know what an irrevocable trust looks like from the inside. I understand that the legal structures I built are not available to everyone in the same way, but the principle behind them is available to everyone. The principle is this: before you transfer something of value, before you put your name on something, before you gift something or build something or pay off something, talk to someone who understands how that thing can be taken. Pay for an hour of an attorney's time. Call a title company and ask them what questions you should be asking. Find out what your state's laws say about property transfers and family members, and what happens when someone dies or becomes incapacitated. None of that knowledge costs as much as finding out too late that the thing you built was standing on ground you did not control. The conversation is uncomfortable. The documents cost money. The process takes time. All of that is true, and all of that is worth it, because the alternative is what happened to my mother's house, or almost happened, which is that someone who had no right to it came very close to taking it from her while she was finishing the hardest 2 years of her life. That is not something I was willing to allow. And once I understood the tools available to me, I made it so that it was not something anyone was able to allow regardless of what they wanted. Preparation is not pessimism. I want to say that again because I think it is the most important thing I have learned from this experience and from 11 years of working in real estate law. Preparation is not pessimism. When you prepare for the worst case, you are not saying you believe the worst case will happen. You are saying that if it happens, you will be ready. You are saying that your love for the person you are protecting is strong enough to include the uncomfortable scenarios, not just the beautiful ones. The uncomfortable scenario in my mother's situation was that someone in her family might look at what I had built and decide it was an opportunity. I did not want to believe that was possible. I hoped it was not possible. I built the protection anyway because hoping is not the same as knowing, and I am a professional who understands the difference between hope and documentation. The documentation held. The hope was not enough, and the documentation was. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I will leave you with what I always close with. When I sat at that kitchen table with Marcus and the 4 documents between us and I said the sentence that ended the conversation, I was not triumphant. I want to be clear about that. There was nothing in that moment that felt like winning. There was something that felt like completion. Like arriving at the place you had been heading toward for a long time and finding that it is exactly what you thought it would be and that you do not need to stay there. I had spent 2 years building something for my mother. I had built the visible part and the invisible part. I had thought ahead and I had worked quietly, and I had shown up at that table prepared for exactly what I found there. And the sentence I spoke was not a victory speech. It was just the truth. The trust does not recognize your interpretation of family, and neither anymore do I. That was the truth. That is still the truth, and it was enough. One sentence, calm, complete, pause. The work that matters most in this story is not the legal work. The legal work is what made it possible. The work that matters most is the 4 years of Saturday mornings I spent thinking about what my mother needed and finding a way to build it. The work that matters most is the phone call where she had her eyes closed under the bright hospital lights, and I told her quietly that she did not have to worry about the house anymore. The work that matters most is the moment she stood on the patio in the afternoon light and I watched her from inside and understood that she was exactly where she should be. The documents protected all of that. The documents are not the story. The story is my mother and her farmhouse sink and her garden and the thermostat she can adjust from her phone now because I set that up too. The documents just made sure that story could not be interrupted by someone who mistook my generosity for their opportunity. Protect what you built. Put the right structures in place before you need them. Find someone who can tell you what those structures look like in your specific situation and invest the time and money to build them. And never stop building for the people who deserve it, because the fortress is just the love expressed in a language that lasts. Both of them say the same thing: I thought this through. I was here before you needed me to be. I am not going anywhere. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching and for sharing these stories with people in your life who might need to hear them. Until next time, protect what you built. And remember, your worth was never up for a vote. Important note: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. Any resemblance to real people, real events, or real locations is purely coincidental. All legal and financial details in this story are included for narrative purposes and do not constitute legal or financial advice.